Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene announced on X that she was working on a new bill to draw new congressional districts. If the bill were to pass, there'd have to be a new census that would only count U.S. citizens. She continued on X, upon completion of the census, the bill will direct states to immediately begin a redistricting of all U.S. House seats process using only the population of U.S. citizens. Thank you, President Trump, for your strong support of my bill, making American elections great again.
In 2024, the House passed a similar bill, but the Democratic-controlled Senate refused to take it. Democratic critics of the effort cite Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, which reads in part, "Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed." In 2024, Congressman Jamie Raskin critiqued the measure, saying, quote, "For all of you textualists out there, the plain reading of the text of the Constitution is clear. For all of the constitutional originalists out there, the original purposes have been carefully articulated and never rebutted."
On the other hand, Congressman James Comer argued at the time it was unfair that some states have more representation due to a higher concentration of non-citizens. He said this dilutes the one person, one vote principle for citizens in states with fewer non-citizens. It is clear that Congress can and should ensure a fair apportionment based on equal representation of citizens.
Look, it seems to me that the Constitution is actually quite clear. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was of course on the show last week, is demanding they count US citizens only. That's not what the Constitution says. In addition to the amendment that we noted, it also in Article 1, Section 2 refers to the whole number of persons, actual enumeration. So, I mean, she can make the argument if she wishes. It seems to me that it would require some form of constitutional amendment to actually make that, give that wings.
Yeah, possibly. I think the closest analogy is the Three-Fifths Compromise back from the U.S. founding, which is that southern states wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted the ability to have slaves that did not have voting rights, did not have equal rights under the law, to help their economies, but they also wanted those slaves to count as full persons for the purposes of representation and taxation. And a lot of people misunderstand the Three-Fifths Compromise. They think that it means that the U.S. was counting slaves as three-fifths of a person, but really the compromise was meant to prevent those southern states from being able to have it both ways. And so I think we're seeing a similar thing now with illegal immigrants, where states that have high populations of illegal immigrants recognize that those individuals cannot vote and in a lot of cases do not pay taxes. Some of them do under the taxpayer identification number, but they also want equal representation for the purposes of district apportionment. So I do think that there needs to be a serious look at this in making sure that states that do import large numbers of illegal immigrants and have sanctuary city laws are not able to take advantage of that through the electoral system.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it is an interesting conversation to have, and it would be more interesting if I could retain my voice today, but I'll try my best. The point is that I think in one sense, in terms of the apportionment issue, as you are well aware, these numbers, the census numbers, also drive the apportionment of federal grants to the states. And I do think there's in fact an argument that can be made that states or other localities with a high number of unauthorized immigrants, those are still services that have to be provided for by those authorities, and therefore it is legitimate to count those people, in addition to obviously the constitutional imperative, as it seems to me. The other point, though, about asking the citizenship question is that this has come up before, and it was rejected in 2019. One of the reasons it was rejected was that the idea that when you ask that question in modern times, you reduce the number of people who respond to the census, and that then has all sorts of negative impacts. One of them being that you could ultimately end up, in effect, reducing the power, the enfranchisement of people who are in fact US citizens living in what are called mixed status households, in other words, where other people in the household are illegal or unauthorized. One migration think tank estimates 3.9 million households have both a US citizen member and somebody who is here without authorization. So the danger, I think, is that generally speaking, people are not going to snitch on census forms on their spouse or parent, but then in doing that, do they just not participate in the census, and therefore you create the problem that you're ostensibly trying to remedy?
Yeah, I think ideally the census could have two separate numbers. One for the purpose of this grant money that you're talking about and for general population counting, and a separate one that only counts citizens for the purposes of drawing congressional districts and determining how much representation a state gets. And I'm not insinuating that you make this argument, but I recall a few years ago when Republicans were talking about how Democrats import illegal immigrants for the sake of helping them in elections. That was often misinterpreted to mean that Republicans believed that illegal immigrants could vote in federal elections. And it's more the argument that Marjorie Taylor Greene is making where, well, if you are in California and you have, let's say, 2 million illegal immigrant residents, then you get more representation in Congress and more votes in the Electoral College, which is how you influence elections by importing illegals.
First of all, I think that some of the people on the right who made the argument that Democrats were importing illegals were doing it in a more noxious way than that. Now, that doesn't take away from the fact that there is the argument that you just described. One of the difficulties for that is it's not at all clear that that benefit would only accrue to Democratic states. Texas is one of the states which benefits from that factor by about 1 congressional seat, it is estimated. The other thing is that there are very exaggerated claims made about the extent to which that has a difference. Our old friend Elon Musk has claimed that up to 20 Democrats would lose 20 Democratic seats if a thing that is like Greene's was enacted. There's just no evidence for that at all. There's an academic study done that suggested that in most recent censuses, the most number of seats that would have changed were 2. There was one census in 2010 that may have changed 5 seats. I understand the principle, and I understand the argument that, well, it's the principle that matters rather than the number. Fair enough, but I do think it's worth noting that there are sometimes exaggerated claims made about the effects of that.
Yeah, and I think, the counter to that would be even 2 to 5 seats, as we see right now in Congress, is a significant amount. Republicans have a slim majority in both houses. Democrats have had slim majorities before. That can make a huge difference in passing legislation. And my fundamental feeling about this, and I think the feeling of a lot of Americans, is if you're not a constituent, if you're not someone who is either paying taxes or has the ability to even participate in elections, then you shouldn't be represented by a politician.
It's a difficult one, Amber, because I think that we already have, obviously, unauthorized migrants severed from the ability to vote for a politician. But that seems to me different from the fact that the politician is still representing the collective interests of her or his district. And if those collective interests include a significant proportion of people who are undocumented, I don't love the word undocumented actually, unauthorized, then I think it is still fair to count them. Actually, I think that the separation between the right to vote and the broader issue of who the politician represents is a distinction worth making.
Yeah, I guess my pushback on that would be that politicians should represent the people, meaning the American people.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the law says that it should be enumerated according to the whole number of persons in each state, so it doesn't agree with you thus far.
Why is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez under federal investigation? We'll tell you next on Rising.